stuff. This is Theta stage, and on it is Trond Hjorteland. He's an IT architect and socio-technical facilitator from the consulting firm Scienta.no. And he has many years' experience working with large, complex, and business-critical systems, primarily as a developer and architect on middleware and back-end applications. His main interests are service orientation, domain-driven design, event-driven architectures, and open socio-technical systems. He's working on industries like telecom, media, TV, and public sector. His mantra is great products emerge from collaborative sense-making and design, and he is going to talk about socio-technical systems design for the digital coal miners. He said it's not too technical, right? So let's welcome with a round of applause, Trond.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the introduction. Yes, welcome everybody. As he said, I'm actually an IT dude, but I'm going to follow up on something that Kevin touched upon in the keynote today. Everybody was at the keynote? Because there's actually going to be a connection there. Remember he said that the people are the hard problem in software development? I've taken that on board, seriously. Because as he said, that I have a background in IT, and I've done that for all my life. But I've sort of seen that the way we develop software, it's tricky because there's people doing it, right? We're writing software, people are writing software for others, and we're writing products, software products for others. So the people part, we haven't had too much focus on that. So I started looking into another branch of science, really, social sciences. Any social scientists in the room? Because I'm not a social scientist, as you've probably heard. So I'm a student. So I actually said social technical facilitator, but I updated that to say that I'm a student of social technical systems. So this is going to be a highly non-technical talk, just to be warned. Even though it says tech in the title, right? But the tech here is broader than you think. If you imagine everything that's not social, that's tech. How we do the work, the processes we use, so of course the technologies that we use, like processes we use, everything that's not social, that is not about organization and the people, that's tech. Yeah. So it's a broad term. So the reason why I sort of went into, I sort of said the reason why I went into social sciences, but I specifically went into the branch called socio-technical system design. So you have the socio-technical put together, that you have to look at both the social and the technical part. And also you have to see them as a system. That's what this sort of rather convoluted title says. I'm going to come back to why I call it digital coal mines. It's going to be obvious later on, hopefully. So let's just imagine that we have a group of people, a team. They have been put together, or even better, they have chosen to work together. That's the best approach. But say just they are there. And they have different skills, like the different tech stuff, but they also have different personalities. They are different, very different, individuals, so to speak. So it's a team consisting of individuals. That's important. So they view themselves as an autonomous team, but they're not 100% autonomous, because you can't be if you're in a system. There is a connection with everybody else in that system, which is the company, for example. And by the way, when you say socio-technical system design, it's more about, it's not necessarily just about workplaces, any kind of organization. It can be a committee, it can be your neighborhood, whatever. It can be any type of social organization. So they are a semi-autonomous team. They have some relation to other teams, for example. They were given a purpose, or they, even better, they have found their purpose. But again, we have to work out something that's familiar to us, and we had never, I assume, never been asked to get a purpose. We are given it by somebody else. So let's just assume that for now. But these people were put together because they were experts in the field. Whatever purpose they were given, they were the experts. Nobody else was telling them what to do. So they were given minimal critical specification. Imagine they were just given a purpose. That could be it. And by doing this, they also have to figure out how to work together themselves. Nobody else is telling them how to work. They were designing themselves for their context. Which means also then that they have the power authority to decide themselves. And in order to do that, if they're going to have the power and authority, they need to also have control over the variance, meaning that any change in the environment or change to them, they have to take charge of that themselves. They can't blame on anybody else or just send it to somebody else for fixing. They have to do it themselves. which also means that they have to own all the information flow that's in the system. They also want to be somewhat very robust. Say, for example, if somebody goes on a paternity leave or somebody leaves the company or whatever, they need to be able to compensate for that. So they couldn't be like, you have probably heard of these T figures, T profiles. They have to have some, and be able to cover for others in some way. Maybe even a COM. I see someone said of pi or COM profiles, even that. Also, this team, as it is designed, has to be supported by the rest of the organization, which includes pay and anything else, HR things and whatever. They also see that there's some inherent needs that need to be fulfilled, apart from pay or security or something like that. There are some intrinsic motivators in addition to the external ones. For example, that you want to feel that you're proud of the job, it leads you to a better future and stuff like that. And they know that every design that they have on the system is never complete. So, does this sound like a cool agile setup? It is something that you all dream about. This would be so cool if you have it something. For me, it did. When I read the first, I'm like, okay, this checks all my boxes. This is the way I want to work. This is the sort of perfect agile team. But this was defined in 1970s, early 70s. Sociotechnical system design. These were principles that was designed back then. So if you go back to why I'm doing the talk, is that when I came across this, like, okay, we heard a lot about agile manifesto and everything, but it's not grounded. I haven't found any real grounding in science anywhere. It's just people trying out new stuff, which is cool, but it hasn't been researched properly. And people have done this before, so it has been researched, but it wasn't called agile back then. And the context was not IT. It was like industries. Going to come back to that later on. Industrial manufacturing and stuff. So speaking of that, since there are parallels here, I want to introduce the concept by sort of comparing to something that you already know, at least somewhat, agile. So let's see how these two compare historically, and see how much they compare and where they sort of diverge, or if they do at all, who knows. So let me start with the socio-technical then. As I said, it started way back, so long back that was actually straight after the war. And this is why I called it the coal mines in the title. It started, the first experiment or the observations was done in the coal mines in northern England, in Yorkshire. They had industrialized coal mining after the war because they needed to get speed on this. But I noticed they introduced some cool new technology like the conveyor belt. So you see, tech is more than IT. So they introduced this new tech, but they didn't see the improvements that they expected. On the contrary, they saw a lot of mines actually struggling and doing worse than they did before with the tech. So why was this the case? And they invited some researchers from the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, long name, but that's what I call, from England. From London, sorry, specifically. And what I noticed is some mines, as I said, were doing was managing better than others, and in an extreme manner, too, very different. And I was what's the reason why somebody managed to do this while the others did not? Why this Taylorism and scientific management work seemed to work in some mines, but terribly in others? And terribly, I mean there were work disputes, people were getting sick, people left, absenteeism, people didn't care. Like the worst scenario you can imagine. Being in a coal mine to begin with is kind of terrible, I would assume. Haven't been, but I would assume. But what I noticed is, in some mines, some people took charge of their own sort of work life. They said, okay, we have this new technology. We're not going to listen to these experts outside saying that we have to work in shift, have to do and that. We're going to decide it themselves. So they created these semi-autonomous teams that I mentioned earlier. And then the researchers coined this as a social technical system. They jointly optimized the social need of the team, or the people, and the tech. Because you can't optimize either one separately, because that's not going to work. That's what they showed, or they saw, rather, in this experiment. Right. This was late 1950s, early 50s. So let's take the other city then, agile. This is how agile was, software development was done in the 70s, 80s, 90s even, when people got fed up Waterfall doesn't work. We have to figure out different ways of working. And then there were some people who have tried to experiment with new ways of working. What was later become agile, of course, but back then it was called Scrum, XP, DSRM. There were different techniques, right? What they wanted to get away from was this long feedback loop. That it took years, maybe even 20 years, before you started until you delivered any value out. So they tried to iterate this more. So you see, there is a similarity here to the coal miners in northern England. They saw that this doesn't work, let's try to figure something else out. Let's try it out, something else. So in a way, both agile and Sociotechnical is a democratic movement. People are taking charge of their own lives. Yes. Back to Sociotechnical. In England, they didn't get sort of the traction that I wanted after these wonderful experiments, not experiments, actually, it was observations, but reports from the coal mines. So, and the problem was probably because the owners wasn't interested in self-governing teams that they wanted to control, and they wouldn't give control to the people in the mines. Are you crazy? So it didn't spread. Even though it was good, it didn't spread. They got the opportunity from Norway. You probably can't read this. But the interesting thing here, I'm going to translate later, but the interesting thing in Norway is that there has always been a sort of a democratic, whole Norway is very focused on democracy. So much so that there's a tight collaboration between the Association for Trade Unions and the employees. So there wasn't any fight between these two. They even agreed on setting sort of a wage standard that everybody else has to sort of align to. They agree on this stuff. And also the government was involved in this. But what they lacked and what they wanted was more democracy in the workplace. So this poster from 1966, the 1st of May demonstration in Oslo, says, iron workers demands increased democracy in society and at the workplace, exclamation mark. So they demanded more say in their daily lives. And the sort of scientific management and the industrialization of their work didn't help here. So there was they called in some researchers, and this researcher knew some people in London, specifically at the Tavistock Institute. They were invited over, and they started a program called the Norwegian Industrial Democracy Program, started in 1962. And there they were given full power to do experiments. What sort of work organization works, and what works better than others, and just trying out different things, like for example the things they tried out in the coal mines. And this worked out wonderfully. 4 large companies was included, and not just any companies, but just like national companies, really big one and important ones. So after this industrial democracy program, this set of principles was defined. This is actually specifically from a paper from 1976, it doesn't say here, but he listed these principles. This is how you design a well-working team in an organization. Back to Agile. This is, of course, the manifesto from 2001. You probably have heard this, seen this a lot. I'm not going to go into it, of course, but you see there's a similar thing here. People are figuring out new ways of working. Let's define some, not ground rules, because they're not rules, but principles and values that we agree on. So, okay, of course, these are specifically for IT development. The other ones were for any organization of any kind, but these were specific for. But again, there's no connection between these threads in history. But so this was kind of, maybe I would argue, it probably is the pinnacle of Agile. What has happened since has been everything from okay to terrible. Maybe because the people who signed this stuff had worked on it for 10, 20 years, so they actually aggregated some sensible values that it's hard to see any changes, need for changes to them. Just to give a sort of a one-liner for what Sociotechnical was about. This is actually from 2018, so this is way later. Just to show you that it's still here. It's not gone after the 70s. SDS design was intended to produce a win-win-win situation. Come from paper, this a bit, you know. Anyway, human beings were more committed because they were not teams, they were designing themselves. Technology operated closer to its potential because they designed the work themselves. Nobody was telling them how to operate that machine. They figured this out themselves. And the organization performed better overall while adapting more readily to the change in its environment. And the last bit here is really interesting. I'm going to come back to that. This is where I feel Agile doesn't touch it at all. And you know that. Back to Agile. I love this from Klaus Leopold, who described where does Agile fit in the way we work. It's a very narrow thing. It's just when we do write the code, operate on the code. Everything before, anything after is like, Just discovering, how do we discover a good product? Agile doesn't have an answer to that. We do try with some monstrous, I'm going to come back to that later on, but monstrous attempts to sort of get this. That's an example for how we try to figure out how Agile could work. yeah. I have worked in companies that do this, and yes, it does seem luring, but it's everything but Agile. Actually, the runner-up word for Agile, remember the term Agile was defined in 2001 for the manifesto? They actually voted on which name to give it. The runner-up word was adaptive. I so wish they had chosen that instead of Agile. They couldn't have created adaptive with a capital A and created a noun, or could they? I don't know. Anyway. Like Ken Beck said, Agile has become a devastated wasteland. This has come from the old XP guy who signed the manifesto. So, yeah. So is Agile dead? I don't know. Maybe it needs help. But it's actually Sociotechnical also got to a sort of a grinding halt in the late 70s. Why? Because there was focus on there was less jobs available. In the 70s there was a decline, which means that the owners and the employers have more power. So they could actually they could control things more. So the control was back in the 80s with the total quality management and all these things like business process management and all that stuff that came in the 80s. Another thing with which was a problem, which I also think actually is the problem with Agile, is that it has become so big and so complicated, not complex, complicated, that you need experts in. So if you're going to do an Agile transformation, you call in a lot of experts, or coaches as they like to call themselves. The same thing was in system design, because it was done by researchers. So they didn't train the people in the companies necessarily to do this, because they came in and did a years kind of analysis to figure out how they should work, and then gave the sort of this solution to the companies, which is always problematic because people are not tend to even though they do agree on the design. I didn't make it, so I don't like it, right? So, and again, this is where these things diverge. So let's get into what happened after this. One of the guys who was part of that Norwegian democracy program was called Fred Emery from Australia. He had moved to England to work at the Tavistock Institute, was accidentally there when Norwegians called out, "Can you help us?" He was sent over. The thing is, he was probably the most brilliant system thinker, maybe one of the most brilliant ones ever. You probably haven't heard of him. You probably heard of Aikoff maybe and some others, but him probably not. But what he did, based on their learnings in Norway, they saw that, okay, let's look into why is this working the way it is. But does the scientific approach understand why does this work? Why does this semi-autonomous team actually produce better results? Why is that? And then they dig deeper. And he, as a system thinker then, he went into other strands like cybernetics, for those of you who know that. He went into open system theory, Ludwig von Bertalanffy, and also from psychology, Gestalt psychology specifically. Because he was a social scientist, and a few of those he worked with at the Tavistock was psychologists. So Gestalt psychology was kind of a big thing there. So what he and Trist was the guy who sort of main guy who went to the coal mines and did the studies there. They together figure out that, okay, let's look into this open system thing. There's an environment. Like von Bertalanffy, he was sort of one of the first one who came up with open system theory in biological systems, saying that if you're going to survive in an environment, you have to be open to your environment. You have to get energy from there and food and everything. You can't isolate yourself. It can't be a closed system. Makes sense, I guess. What they did, they took this further, saying, okay, instead of just seeing the environment as something that's there, they look, oh, let's conceptualize the environment. What sort of type of environments can we find ourselves in? They defined 4. I'm only going to mention 3 of them because they are relevant here. Type 1, which they call placid clustered, is an environment where there's enough for everybody. There's abundance. It's neutral. There's no good or bad in this environment. It's static. It doesn't move much. And you don't need anything else but tactics. You just have to move around and figure, oh, there's something first. We can pick that. Right? That's that type of environment. Then the type 3. They just gave them the names, type 3, and the names are like horrible, but they are probably very specific scientifically, but just look at them as names. I haven't understood it either. So disturbed reactive was the next one. Here there's scarcity suddenly, which means that there is competition between to get hold of this, whatever it is. Which also means it's dynamic because people are fighting over the same thing. And you can't use tactics anymore. You have to be strategic. How can you outmove the other ones that want this stuff together in here? Right? So it's a different type of social environment. These are social environments, by the way. Then it came to the type 4, which is really interesting, and we're gonna spend some time on that. It says the same thing as type 3, apart from that it's also unpredictable. Because as I said, you could use tactics. There is tactics in the second. Strategy, you need strategy for the third. The fourth, strategy doesn't work anymore. You have to be operational, you have to be active. You can't just sit and adapt. You have to actively adapt there. That's the difference. The environment itself changes in an unpredictable manner. For those of you who heard of Kinevin and complexity and all that, this is typically a complex environment. There's no way of predicting what's going to happen. The second one you can actually predict somewhat. You can also put these in time periods. When were these now dominant? This one, they say, was dominant before the Industrial Revolution. So it goes back for the earliest time of humankind. So if you imagine these egalitarian hunter-gatherers groups, this is typically the environment they would have. There wouldn't be any real competition between things. Then the Industrial Revolution happened. We started fighting over things. And then they see changes after the war. But this is not a coincidence. They have a long explanation of why there is a change here. I'm not going to go into it. I haven't got time for that. But it's really interesting. If you're really into it, you can read that paper. There's actually a lot of that stuff in that paper from 1965. The causal texture organization environments, this is called. Yes. Yeah, so they define these type of environments. And they looked into what sort of organizational forms do we have. And they tried to figure out how many do we really have. And they decided they sort of boiled it down to only 2. And they called it the genotypical design principles. I'm not going to, you don't have to read everything here, but I'm going to go through them just because we have to have some idea what this is. So say if you decide that you want to build a team or organization or whatever, you have to sort of figure out how would you have redundancy in your organization. As I said, somebody leaving or whatever, hit by a tram or the tram effect or whatever you call it. So you need to build in some redundancy in the system. There are 2 ways of doing this, either by part or by functions. So let's look at these. Just try to start with parts, which means that you have to sort of divide up the work. So that if you have an organization and want to divide up the work, you have to divide it so much so that's easy and cheaply to replace. These are the bits in the bottom here. They're doing specific tasks and can easily be replaced. But since they are doing the simplest task, like for example, like in assembly line, right? They are just doing some specific things. They don't see the whole because they are only preoccupied with a little thing. So in order to see the whole, they need supervision. So you need one layer up. Somebody has to supervise these people. It's not by evil will, but they have to because that's the way it works. And then probably these needs to be supervised. But yeah, so the thing goes up. You recognize this, of course, as bureaucracy. Right? Taylorism, scientific management, and all that good stuff. The other one is very different, and this is the one that I saw sign of in the coal mines and later on in Norway and everyone and other places. You did not want to sort of the redundancy wasn't of the parts anymore; it was of the functions. So in order to be redundant, every person in the team, for example, needs to be able to do more than one thing. Actually, in these industries, they wanted everybody to be able to do everything, so they can rotate and stuff like that. And these groups then relate to other groups, but there's no power hierarchy. There's no supervision. Why? Because the responsibility for control. Can I actually use this now? The responsibility for control, coordination, and goals are moved down to the teams. Here, it was handled by supervisions. KPIs, OKRs, anyone. You see what I mean? Scorecards. Yeah. So here, it's a very different way of working. And if you have been in an agile team, I can guarantee you almost, because, okay, based on anecdotes myself, but you have never really worked in a team like that. You have only worked in something similar to this, but still there was some power hierarchy. There was somebody that was deciding, was calling the shots. So let's map these to these environments. Where would these type of organization be fitting, if you like? This is DP2's area. This is the autonomous teams type of thing. People are just hunter-gatherers again, right? They work perfectly here. Here is the bureaucracy that we all know and not love so much, maybe. So what is happening in DP4? That's the sort of the epiphany that I had. After the war, something happened. Because of the war, actually, people were becoming more and more demanding. They didn't accept the way of working in Type 3 anymore. Because they didn't believe that they would be covered by the government, or because the government could easily just bomb them to oblivion, right? And also suddenly there was more than enough resources for fighting a war. But no, you couldn't have your pay or whatever, right? So they saw that there was so you probably heard of the Cultural Revolution is a good example of this, what happened after the war. So there is something happening here where we actually want to desperately try to move from the bureaucracy to something else. And that something else, we don't quite know what it is, but we know we have to work together. We can't be on our own. So we are a social system that actually try to collaborate ourselves. So that's the democratization that I saw in the mines, and also then kind of agile is, if I'm going to be nice to agile. I think it is similar, very similar. So what Fred Emery, which I mentioned, and the open system theory try to do is try to help this transition, not to a sort of in between like we are now, but into a new DP2. So this is sort of the difference that we see. And this is really interesting because we are back to DP1, DP2 comparison here, by the way. DP1 is simple jobs in a complex organization. Because you need all the bureaucracy and everybody, and if you want to grow, you have to have bigger bureaucracy. And if there's some bugs and faults anywhere, we have to introduce more processes, and there's more bureaucracy, and you see it grows indefinitely almost. While the other one, complex jobs, simple organization. What other things can we see here? If you go into that, like the system way of thinking. This one is very much open. Every team here exposed to the environment. They can't lean on anybody else. This one is more or less closed because we lean on some power, the grown-ups in the organization to take care of us. Yeah, we actually use that term in Norway. It's like, oh, we need to get some grown-ups in here to help us. Which we actually voluntarily make ourselves as kids, which really is ridiculous, but anyway. And also this is severity decreasing. We do not want change in this organization. Because if there's going to be change, it's going to be affected by the hierarchy, and we don't know what happens, so it's going to resist any change. Because it's designed to do something specifically and do it well. It's scientific management, right? So in manufacturing, it's perfect. This one is severity increasing. Here you hate bugs and errors. You want to track them the best you can. Here, they are opportunity to create new things and actually make a better product. That's the approach here. So it's a very different way of approaching things. This low status quo then, this is in an innovative organization, a learning organization, as you might want to call it. And just to use this Kinevan type like thing, it's like this is very fragile and this is resilient. It can adjust to changes in the environment. This really doesn't like change at all. And if it does change again, it just becomes bigger, more bureaucratic, and less fast-moving. Yeah, so the reason why we went into so much theory here is that because without theory, experience becomes like blind. You don't know where you're walking, so you have to have some theory. But you also need some practices, right? Because theory without experience is an intellectual play. What we had so far, it doesn't really make any sense. It makes us understand things, but we need to do something really to get this happening. Again, this is what this is a busy slide, so you don't have to read everything here. We're not going to go through it in detail, but this explains a two-step model for this transition, as I showed earlier. And these practices were defined by Fred Emery and his wife, Marilyn Emery, which is called the two-stage model for active socio-ecological adaptation. Socio-ecological because there's a team that's exposed to environment, the ecology, the environment. So the first step, which they call the search conference. You may have heard of future search. It's similar, not the same, but it's similar. It's been built on this. Watch time. So here is the team here. Organization need to sort of, as they are aware of that the environment is open, that they are open, and they have to that they're fully exposed to the environment. They have to be able to learn from the environment, which they call puzzle learning here, by the way, which means that you never know what this is going to be in the end, but you try something. But you have to be actively adapt this as well. You can't just sit and adapt. You have to be actively in charge. If you just sit and wait, you're probably too late. So you have to be involved in the environment. So this is the whole search conference is a 2-day exercise where they sort of look at what would the environment look like in 10 years? Not our environment, but the environment as a whole, like this extended social field. Where are humankind going to be in 10 years? And the cool thing when doing that is that then you remove any obstacles between the people being part of the search, because then you agree on the same thing. You don't have any baggage anymore. You all want to do something better, what you can be in the future. And then you decide what we are, what you have been, and then you figure out, okay, based on that, what can we be in this environment that we just described? So this is part of the search. But the thing is, so this, by the way, this is a very much, again, you have to run this as a DP2 as well, which means that there's no hierarchy when you're running the sessions. Everybody is on the same level. There's no bosses here anymore, for example. So this is strictly very much, it has to be run like the DP2. As soon as there is a whiff of somebody controlling this, it's not going to work. So it has to be on our strictly DP2 fashion. And that's even more so for the next phase. Because if you've done this search, if you figure out also we have a strategy what we're going to be, and we think this is going to work out, and we're going to try it. If you go back to operationalize this in a bureaucracy, it's not going to work. Have you done I have definitely. If you've been in part of a workshop that you felt like this was so cool, we worked so well together, we managed to do this fantastic thing, and then you get out of that session and go back to work, and it's and there's scorecards again, and it's follow up and everything. So you really lose that energy that you had in that organization. And this is similar. You can't move from that way of sort of community building as they did in phase 1 into the same type of organization. So then they came up with a participant design workshop where every team designs themselves how they're going to work based on, for example, some goals, objectives that they came out of that search conference. In the search conference, there's a limited set of people who can join in. In this one, everybody is in. And you do a participant design workshop for the whole organization. Yes. You might imagine, okay, so like an agile transformation, how long does they take? There is no, there's no end for an agile transformation. I know, you never get finished. But where do you sort of see that you have moved to something different? It takes years. And you probably no end goal even. This is like, okay, we want to be something sometime. You bring in these consultants and you try to pull on safe or whatever. This stuff also should be fast, because in the in-between is the worst. It was okay when you had sort of, the structure was there, was bad, but you knew how things work, you knew who pulled the shots, who was responsible to do that, and you have the competency in the right place and all that stuff. And then suddenly you reorganize to a different way of organizing. You have to learn that stuff, but it should be fast. There shouldn't be confusion of who calls the shots. But this has to actually be quite fast. How it could still look in the end, and this is not theoretical again. This is actually from, or actually this is, because this is from a paper, but there's a lot of experience reports on this. When people reorganize themselves based on their context, and they will typically look something like this. This is a medium to large organization. If you have a small organization, you might even end up with one team. You see, then bigger, the more layers you're going to have. So this is a hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy of functions, not authority. Nobody higher up in the hierarchy is calling the shots, controlling somebody underneath them. That's why they illustrated this, these double lines you see here, right? Which means that any change in organization can appear anywhere. But if, say, for example, they see that, well, the market is not working for us, we have to do some changes. There has been a social change, there has been COVID or whatever, this product doesn't work anymore, we need to rethink this. So if they are fully responsible for it, they can just do it. But if they see where we need to coordinate this, then they have to negotiate with other parts of the organization in order to do this. So, but these things can also come from the top and the bottom, and come from anywhere. And as you see here, there's productive work at every level here. This is a large organization, so at the top, you probably have some C-level kind of things that works on strategies and stuff like that. But they also have goals and productive work like anybody else. This level, you might have some management that's needed to coordinate across, but it's not control. So it's productive work. They would have goals like anybody else. And the goals wouldn't be dependent on what the people at the operation level did. They have goals of their own, which they are solely in charge of. You see, there's probably, I have never worked in something that looks remotely similar to this, and suspect you haven't either. You have probably worked in a DP1 where somebody tried to organize some self-governing team somewhere. And it works fine until the shit hits the fan. And then suddenly you know who's the boss. Anyway, here that would never happen. This is the two Emrys that I mentioned earlier. This is Marilyn. This is Fred. Fred died in '97, unfortunately. Marilyn is still alive and still doing productive work. She's 80 plus, so it's really impressive. Sharp as ever. They also have this wonderful website if you want to look into some of their other work, and from them and others as well, not just one of the best domains names I've come across. Social science that actually works. So, yeah. They are kind of opinionated, these two. That must be said. But they have proved themselves again and again and again. Just to end up with a couple of quotes just to illustrate how different this is. As soon as people are forced to compete, they have to look after their own interest, and so self-interest come to dominate a life in DP1 structure. All the team building in the world cannot change this dynamic. How many team buildings have you built? How well have they produced? How great results have they produced? As I said, you have a wonderful experience, come back to work, and everything is back to normal. Normal. It's actually worse than it was before you went on that, because now you know better. So that's the thing that they said that the in between DP1 and DP2 is actually worse than DP1, because in DP1 you have this forced authority or authoritarianism, but in the in between, the mixing, you add confusion to the whole thing. Yeah. So another one also is, which I really love. It's only when the people involved work out their own designs that the necessary motivation, responsibility, and commitment to effective implementation is present. This is the participative thing, the democratic thing. And I think you all know this. If you get a design, and you can maybe even love it, but you're not gonna like it because it wasn't yours. It's actually very irrational, but that's how people work. That's how we operate. That's why so it's really important that we are actually part of the design, whatever that is, architecture, governance, or whatever it is. Acuff said the same thing. Another famous system thinker, Russell Acuff. He said it's absolutely essential that people that have to implement a plan do the planning. So this is so the whole thing here is about DP2 again, right? There's nobody else calling the shots. So just to summarize, think we're running out of time. This is me doing something that, or our team actually, I have to work, doing something that really scared the living daylights out of me when I was explained what this is going to be like. Oh, be careful! Don't put your legs down. Because you're going to break. And if you fall off the boat, you have to just float like. So I felt, of course, nothing happened. It was the most fantastic joyride. My point here is that we sort of somehow, when we get to work, we don't like complexity and unpredictability. When we enter the office door, we want plans, we want schedules, we want like KPIs, we want even OKRs as they call now. Sorry. You see, we want this predictability. But the work at work and the world at work is not more predictable than in real life, for example, doing that. So we know how to deal with complexity, we just have to let ourselves do that at work as well. And then as a team, you can't do it alone. So I think we need to grow and ground agile in social sciences. This is my main message here, basically. We need to look into whatever other people have done on this part. Because it's actually nonsensical to scale agile, for example. Agile was created for those teams, how they work, had nothing to do with the rest. So the Klaus Leopold illustration is correct by design. That's how agile was defined. So we need to descale the organization instead. And by doing that, we have to create participative design, the democratically designed team. People do that themselves, design the teams themselves. And by doing that, you create a learning organization that is adaptive to the environment because they have to. They can't put it on anybody else. So you want self-managing groups everywhere, not just at the bottom layer, but everywhere in the organization, even at the top. You probably should start at the top. I didn't say that actually, but when you do redesign an organization, you start at the top as a group. They sort of work out what they come up with in the search conference and everything, and then you start at the bottom and work yourself up. You don't go sequentially down the layers. You start at the bottom. And the interesting thing is that when the teams have sort of redesigned themselves, what's left, that's up for the management to deal with. So they actually did have some numbers where I said when they went into one of these workshops out of that iteration, they had 40 managers. They had 10 left after they were finished. So you get rid of the fluff in the middle, kind of. So yeah, so I'm going to end up with saying that. So we should learn to don't adapt to change because that's actually it's not good enough. You have to learn to be adaptive. Which I wish again that agile was called, not agile. But again, all right, that was it. If you wanna reach out, I'm at most social platforms with this nick, so you don't have to pronounce the whole name like you fortunately have. Trond. It doesn't help much, but that's probably shorter anyway. Remember. Yes.
A round of applause.
Thank you. You have 1 minute or something?
Yeah, that was great.
Oh yeah, I clocked in at least, not run over.
Yeah. So, do we have any questions for Tom?
I mean, this is not something that if you have questions, I would actually be quite impressed because it's there's a lot to take in. There's a lot. Probably everything here was probably new to everybody. I assume so. But so instead of saying what questions do you have, what thoughts do you have? That's more interesting to hear.
Questions and thoughts are both accepted, and we would like to hear some.
Exactly. But so I don't have the answer. I'm a student myself. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, how would you get going with this? Oh.
The theory is nice.
Yeah, exactly. And even the practices are good and they have been proven themselves and everything. But it is the million-dollar question, really. So how can you trigger such a change in an organization? The thing that the researchers and the science or the consultants that have done this in space mainly in Australia and some in Norway as well, but it's a different tradition. There's Sociotechnical all around the world, by the way. There's in Australia, there's in the lowlands.
Can you come
sorry,
closer?
yeah.
There's all blue on you, so we can't see your face when you're talking.
Maybe I should just move over here.
Yeah. You have to catch the cloud.
Yeah.
Yes.
Annoying that I had the blue right there. No, so there is this tradition everywhere actually in the world. In Australia, as I said, that's the Emeries where they're from. There's in America, there's lowlands, there's Scandinavia, there's different places, even India, I think those. But the thing is, how do you trigger this change? And what they say is that the companies approach them when they're in dire straits. when there's no help, there's no chance, they have to do something. That's when I do. Yes. So just an example, a shoe manufacturer in Australia, they wanted to compete with the Chinese market. They were overrun by the cheap shoes from China. So they tried lean, which is interesting. They managed to sort of go from a lead time from months to weeks or maybe days even. But then it plateaued, didn't get any further. Nothing happened, and it wasn't good enough. They brought in this consultant that I have some collaboration with. He did some socio-technical approaches. They redesigned, the teams redesigned themselves. They went from days to hours, which means that you could walk in the morning, say, I want this type of shoe with this leather and blah, 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 and come and pick it up later that day. That's the sort of the lead time they got down to. They did falter, by the way, because they didn't consider the environment. So the way they did this, they actually ruined the environment. So that's the importance of being sort of observant about the competition, that the environment that you're working in. So they actually faltered, even though. So China won anyway. Yes? Yeah. Yeah. That's more.
Okay. The quote was the people in the plan, they should be
part
of planning, right?
Yes, that was Aker's quote. That it's essential that people are in charge of a plan has to be part of the planning, because if they don't create it or at least a part of it, they won't be committed to it. That's the commitment bit that I sort of zoom back to. So this is based on research that actually go down to the 40s on group dynamics. So this is not something that Yemris came up with, or even Aker. This is actually psychological group dynamic research. It's really driven into us, though. As I said, I was kind of hyperboling, saying that if there's a perfect plan and I don't like it, I'm not gonna. So of course that's probably not gonna happen. I'm sorry.
My question is, shouldn't we work on both ends? Not only change the system
to
involve people in planning, but also work with the people
Oh.
Accept the plans of others.
Now I hear some of the social scientists whispering in my ear. This is human relation thinking. And this is something they actually tried that in the coal mines back in they tried to sort of to give people more opportunities and give them better pay and something like that, but it doesn't play out well. So they even say that, for example, a facilitation is not something that is good. You have to be a manager of the process. So you should be so far away how this is done, so they don't suspect that you have some play in it. But they have to learn how to do this, of course. Yes.
There. One more question.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is just like lipstick on a pig kind of thing, right? You try to make it prettier. And this is also a brilliant quote from, I think it was Peter Drucker, who said, it's important to do the right thing, not the thing right. It's the similar kind of ideas, right? You can try to do it better and better, but if you're already doing the wrong thing, you're doing it wronger. That's an Aker quote. I feel that we do that a lot with Agile, actually.
We have one more question.
Cool.
So actually you showed like one slide where we saw like two types of hierarchies, right? In the applications, one was task-based, one was like
I can bring that up. Yep.
applications were simple, but that people tend to do more. So the question is like on the one where the hierarchies are simpler, people tend to do more. I think it was.
Was it this one?
The idea is the same.
Yeah.
So the question is like to what extent then you should overlap with each other's functions, because so if you're working in a cross-functional team, right, you have
Yep.
engineers, PMs, EMs, right, and when you try to do more things, you tend to overlap their functions, right? And I don't know if that will be uncomfortable above, right? At least at, on the top there are some C-level people who are then, designing the strategies. Should you even be part of those? Like, how far should you?
Yeah, also a very good question, because this is something that comes up. Does that mean that everybody have to learn and read the strategy documents? To a certain extent, yes. But again, if you go back to this model, this is really important, because here we try to do something randomly in the system, right? We just it's not systemic. It's actually anti-systemic, something I often talked about. If you try to do improvements here, you don't improve the whole. Often you make it worse if you do that. So if you go back to, hopefully I'm going to answer your question, I'm not sure. This one. So for example, the ones at the top here, they do the strategic documents and stuff and work outside to the productive work, right? Based on, for example, the search conference. Right? They know sort of how they should maneuver. They have goals of their own. And the people at the bottom, of course, have goals of their own. And there is also goals in the middle. So could you rephrase so I sort of go in the right direction next time?
No, like the first thing was that once you start having more responsibilities,
Yeah.
right? To what extent should you go? Like, again, this is more from this example. Like, if you are like at the bottom, right? Should you go like from bottom to level 1? Is that okay, or
Yeah.
how far should you go, or level as feels uncomfortable that you're kind of getting into there?
Is it possible to answer this question quick, because there are some
Yes.
people moving? And
Yes, I'm going to say that they have their goals and their context, right? So if there's something that hits across the context that they are in charge of, they have to negotiate with somebody else. So if they say on the same level, they say, okay, we need to discuss with this team how we're going to solve this. And they don't, but then again, for sure, it could be something that's more managerial. There's something how we are doing things. We should approach the market differently. They probably have to go up. And maybe they have to do a new search conference, because the market has changed so much that I have to rethink the whole strategy. But hopefully the ones on the top actually had a finger on that. So they would. So, but change can happen everywhere, anywhere. But they have to know which to relate to. Yes.
Great, thank you.
If that
for the
helps.
question.
Very good questions.
Okay, if you have any questions, you can approach Trond here.
Sure.
And we should close now, because there is some break happening, and then we are going to have CTO awards. So once again, a round of applause for Trond for perfect
Thank you.
presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Got it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was always interesting to. I didn't say